Welcome to this video on Conspiracies from the tabletop role-playing game Hunter the Vigil. If I did mention it before, I will now. Hunters in Vigil are arranged into tiers based on their size and sophistication. Cells are Tier 1, Compacts Tier 2, and Conspiracies are Tier 3. Tier 3, or Conspiracies, are the big boys and girls. Their reach is multinational, their budgets are massive, and their skills, in some instances, defy human limitations. But without further ado, Conspiracies. Aegis Kai Doru. Human history is replete with legends of ancient and powerful treasures, created and used by mythic figures. Some of the stories say that these artifacts are protected in tombs and labyrinths, or watched over by powerful guardians. The Aegis Kai Doru claim that they are oftentimes the guardians that those stories mention. Aegis Kai Doru is itself ancient. They claim that their founding predates the Great Deluge, and once they were mages, the proud guardians of mystical artifacts in an ancient city. Then some war occurred, a war that resulted in the Aegis Kai Doru's predecessors being cast out from their labyrinth. Their enemies not only exiled them, but through their ignorance brought doom on the Aegis Kai Doru's homeland, plunging their island into the sea forever. So the Aegis Kai Doru declared unending war on those who ruined the land, the shapeshifters and mages. Millennia later, the Aegis Kai Doru have forgotten their own magic, but not their name, and never their oath of vengeance. They are the shield and the spear. They will protect what must not be lost, and slay those who stole their paradise. The Aegis Kai Doru are led by an inner circle from Athens, Greece, keeping a register of relics along with a list of monsters slain. The 9 members of the inner circle are extremely discreet about who is offered membership in the conspiracy, often watching potential recruits for years before even approaching them. More often than not, the Aegis Kai Doru recruits from the families of present members, some of whom have legacies that can be traced back to the fall of Troy. The Aegis Kai Doru are structured like a Greek mystery cult, with at least 2 levels of initiation, and most members of the Aegis Kai Doru don't even know that there is a second circle of initiation. Truthfully, the first initiation is harrowing enough. An initiate is locked in a labyrinth at sunset and given until dawn to find their way out, all while inhaling hallucinogenic gases fed into the maze. The initiate is assailed by visions and monsters as they try to escape before time runs out. Those who do are met at the exit by the guardians and required to swear the vow to destroy those who work magic and those who change skin. The vow is the key to the labyrinth and the only way to walk out of there alive. Upholding the vow occasionally has to yield to certain practical considerations, however. Sometimes a guardian is simply overmatched. Other times, they must decide whether to destroy a will worker or a shape changer who is relatively benign. In a few instances, mages and werewolves are fighting each other, and the Aegis Kai Doru finds it expedient to just let them go at it. The sword of the Aegis Kai Doru keeps the vow literally. They hold a grudge against shapeshifters and will workers, targeting them for special attention. For the sword, it does not matter if the mages and werewolves of today do not know why the vow was made. The sword only needs to know that it was made and must be carried out to the last. The sword of the majority of the Aegis Kai Doru's hunters. The temple protects the treasures of the Aegis Kai Doru and seeks to add them to the items under its protection already, especially those thought to be lost to time. The temple's view of the vow is less stringent than that of the sword, but still the temple respects the sword as necessary. The scroll keeps the records of that which the temple protects and the sword uses. They also test those items that fall into the hands of the Aegis to learn how they function, and also serve as a repository for the information on the weaknesses of the things that the Aegis Kai Doru hunts. If they lack any of the enthusiasm of the sword, it is only because they have a better idea of what the sword is actually pursuing. The Ascending Ones. The sun rises and the sun sets, as it has since before the world, and will do so after the world ends. The Egyptians believed that the scarab god of the dawn, creation and rebirth, Khepri, ushers the sun into the sky each morning. Each dawn, Amun-Ra is reborn, and each evening he dies. Two ancient cults of warriors were created to protect the land of Egypt and the people: the cult of Set, who fought by night, and the cult of the Phoenix, who fought by day. But the cult of Set fell to evil and disappeared. Huge surprise there. So their mandate fell to the cult of the Phoenix. They still fought valiantly, but soon the leaders realized that they could not keep up battling monsters both day and night without rest. Finally, one of the leaders of the cult of the Phoenix drafted an elixir that would allow him to continue to lead by day and night. For 3 years, 3 months, 3 weeks, and 3 days, he fought evil without rest or respite, drinking his elixir as soon as the sun went down. Finally, his body gave out, and he perished. Another leader of the cult tried to craft a similar potion, only palliated with poison to keep him from over-consuming, as his counterpart had. He drank his potion, and then died instantly. A third fortified himself with prayer and self-discipline before he consumed the second potion. This time he drank and lived, as his body converted the poison in the potion to sweet water. So the cult of the Phoenix was reborn as the cult of the Phoenix ascending from the flames, or later, the Ascending Ones. The Ascending Ones practice a combination of prayer, meditation, asceticism, and alchemy, brewing elixirs fatal to all but themselves. The Ascending Ones spread from Egypt into the Middle East and Europe in their war against the forces of evil. Their knowledge of brewing, distilling, and alchemy meant that they were able to fund their hunting activities as purveyors of both medicines, poisons, and narcotics. It is believed by some that it was the Ascending Ones who introduced opium to a wider audience. As time passed and nation-states took a dimmer view on the use and manufacture of drugs, the Ascending Ones have gone underground with their trade as members and leaders of various criminal organizations. Some of them have noted the hypocrisy of the Ascending Ones' war to save humanity as a whole, all while funding it by feeding human misery. The mission of the Ascending Ones is twofold. First, to protect humanity from monsters, and second, to prevent the knowledge of the supernatural from falling into mortal hands. The Ascending Ones are effectively a paramilitary organization and structure themselves along lines of combat, logistics, reconnaissance, communications, and command. However, they are not mindless exterminators. Some creatures are reasonable if not entirely peaceful. They have enough experience with the world of darkness to have learned the difference between a hungry dog and a rabid one. In that vein, the Ascending Ones practice an ancient form of diplomacy called Sula, essentially a messenger who travels back and forth between feuding sides until a compromise can be reached. However, should diplomacy fail, the Ascending Ones will proceed to burn the monster in question to ashes. The cult of the Phoenix is so old and widespread that its members wouldn't immediately recognize each other just because their practices and traditions have changed thanks to time and isolation. One of the largest groups of the Ascending Ones are the Order of the Southern Temple, a subsect that has infused its practices with Western Hermeticism, which has led to a preference for complex, arcane rituals and strict hierarchies. The Knife of Paradise is comprised of holy warriors, primarily of Jewish, Christian, and Muslim persuasion, though there is a small but fervent sect that keeps the ways of Amun-Ra. They are the Sicarii, the Crusaders, the Mujahid, all rolled into one. Given their shared bonds of battle, religious conflict between members of the Knife is a rarity. The Jagged Crescent are unapologetic gangsters and drug traffickers. They are the main source of funding for the rest of the Ascending Ones. Consequently, their profession and contacts tend to bring them into close proximity with the things they hunt. The most common way the Jagged Crescent uses to conceal its hunts in cities is by disguising them as drug robberies or gangland hits. The Cheiron Group. The Cheiron Group has been around since the early 20th century. Its primary focus has always revolved around medical technology, devices, equipment, drugs, and prosthetics. If you read TCG's carefully crafted press releases, they are the most benevolent company in the world, a boon to all mankind. So, it was only with great reluctance and utmost concern for their reputation that in 1999, the medical conglomerate filed several defamation suits against a variety of parties in the United States who loudly proclaimed that Cheiron was controlled by satanic forces and that its logo, a bit of harmless pagan-based iconography, was actually occult symbolism. By the time it was all said and done, the Cheiron Group came out on top, plunging their legal foes into disrepute and insolvency, an unfortunate necessity to protect their valuable public image, along with the life-saving cures that TCG produces annually. The thing is, however, the cranks, the televangelists, and the activists were much closer to the truth than they realized. The company's logo was supposedly designed by Edward Barrett in 1905, but that same logo appears much earlier, on a stone medallion above a portal to an 18th century Masonic lodge in London. In a 1632 tome, printed in Geneva, Switzerland concerning forbidden religions. Also, on the helm of a 15th century suit of Bavarian plate armor, and perhaps most troubling, on a relief found in a 3,000-year-old sunken temple off the coast of Santorini, Italy. In fact, Barrett, the ostensible designer of the company logo, is the only person who has ever been listed as a member of the board of directors, and he retired in 1921. The heart of the matter is that Cheiron, as a whole group of employees who aren't engaged in medical research, development, or even marketing. Buried deep inside the Cheiron Group is the Field Research Projects Division. This division is tasked with locating and capturing supernatural creatures as resources, test subjects, parts, and whatever other medical uses can be extracted from their flesh, blood, and bones. The job pays exceptionally well, but in addition to a sizable paycheck, FPD members are required to undergo certain medical procedures, or let's say improvements. It's in their contracts after all. Specialized organs, bone grafts, muscle transplants, and who knows what else. But these are trade secrets, company property if you will. You don't leave Field Projects Division. When Cheiron is done with you, they haul your remains down to research and development to be salvaged, repurposed, and finally rendered down into usable products, or slurry. Cheiron makes shameless use of Directive 53, or rather, Safety Phrase 53, as a legal shield for their actions, though Directive 53 is, at the time of this recording, superseded by the 2008 CLP regulation in the EU. Directive 53 mandated companies to avoid exposing the public to dangerous substances and obtain special instruction prior to use. This is probably more for the field agents who operate using the Field Projects Division Handbook, a company-provided manual on how to identify and neutralize potential assets, or rather, anything that Cheiron field agents can haul back to the lab in usable condition. The handbook has surprisingly little useful information and no way to be traced back to Cheiron. Those who stick to the handbook usually die, and quickly. This means that field agents have a free hand in how they capture supernaturals, so long as they make their quota, even if it means occasionally teaming up with other hunters, which puts them in the precarious position of needing to help other hunters while making sure that they don't kill the thing until a DPT, or dedicated pickup team, can come out and retrieve it. And no, vampires and werewolves are not a big get to Cheiron, unless it's something they haven't seen before. R&D has enough bloodsuckers and dog boys in various states of incapacity. If they want another one, they'll let you know. The bulk of Field Projects Division personnel are retrieval agents, who do the hard work of hunting creatures, neutralizing them, and leaving them for dedicated pickup teams to recover. Another team within FPD is recruitment. Their job is to find new FPD members, especially retrieval agents, work up a file on them, and determine whether or not an employment contract should be offered. Given that the Cheiron Group suffers from high turnover, thanks in no small part to the uselessness of the handbook, recruitment hires more than the FPD retains over time. A third team is field research, effectively poachers. The FR team takes, observes, or infiltrates other conspiracies of hunters, studies them, and as often as they can steals their kills, their methods, and their equipment if the opportunity for a hostile takeover presents itself. The Lucifuge. In the 9th century AD, a wealthy woman of Milan commissioned a group of genealogists and occult researchers to locate the children of Lucifer, the leader of the fallen angels. You see, Lucifer, when not plotting to overthrow God, was a rather prolific sower of his, wild brimstone oats. Since time immemorial, there have been children of the Prince of Hell, men and women who unwittingly come into their infernal heritage, along with their descendants, particularly those born 7 generations after the original polluting of their bloodlines with the satanic seed. This Milanese lady, the Lucifuge, found these children of the 7th generation and sent messengers to them with an offer: reject their cursed forebearer and fight against his minions, or die. In some instances, a child of the 7th generation was kidnapped and persuaded to join the battle against hell, but the choice was ultimately the same as stated before: join or die. This has been the recruiting procedure of the Lucifuge, both the lady and the organization named after her, for the last 12 centuries. She and the organization are in fact one and the same. The Milanese cadre continues its work as it has from the beginning, though their methods have undergone some refinement. The genealogists and occultists continue to do their work, locating a new child of the 7th generation. That information is then passed on to agents who are closer geographically to their target. Then the observations and the approach are made. Strangely, however, Asia remains a source of frustration for the Lucifuge. Either Lucifer did not travel so far, or his descendants are being concealed by something or someone. Members of the Lucifuge know from personal experience that simply because a creature is born of Satan does not make them inherently evil. They bring with them a sense of self-awareness to the hunt, as well as a reluctance to use the abilities that are their birthright and their curse. But when some group of vampires goes around calling themselves Belial's brood, that makes the choice to hunt them much, much easier. The Lucifuge has a great deal of lore dealing with angels and demons at their fingertips. Demons they despise and occasionally command. Angels they fear and avoid. There are records in the library at Milan of Lucifuge hunters encountering angels, usually ending in the death of the descendant of Satan. In stranger writings are tales of being purged of infernal taint, transformation into eldritch horrors, or the imparting of cosmic secrets. One enemy that the Lucifuge does not allow are their fellow children of Lucifer, the ones that the Lucifuge did not reach or fully embraced their legacy. Lucifuge hunters largely embrace the denial of their hellish origins. Lucifer is the source of all evil, and his blood is in them. They must spend their entire lives renouncing evil, but also show mercy to monsters who do otherwise. The Reconciliation are hunters who believe that they are doing their father's bidding, that by hunting monsters and destroying evil, they are in fact redeeming Lucifer, and eventually he shall be allowed to return to heaven, and hell, his kingdom and prison, will finally be destroyed. The philosophy of the truth is the smallest philosophy of the Lucifuge. They suspect that they are not being told the entire truth about what they are and who they work for. Who is the Lucifuge? Is she really 12 centuries old? Is she in fact one of them? Is she Satan himself? They believe that evil must be fought, to be sure, but there is too much shrouded in mystery for their liking. The Malleus Maleficarum. The Malleus Maleficarum was a controversial book, even in its heyday, written by the German clergyman Heinrich Kramer in 1486 after his failed attempt to prosecute witches in Innsbruck. It was an example of shameless fear-mongering and self-promotion that was largely rejected by the theologians of his day as unethical. However, Kramer's book was popular with secular courts and used to devastating effect. 80 years after the original publication, Pope Paul III gave secret dispensation to an obscure bishop named Ambrogio Bardolino to create an organization of the same name as the controversial book for the purpose of hunting vampires and witches, which raises 2 questions: how and why? The answer to both is Bardolino. The how of it was that the bishop, a very smart man, was smart enough to persuade the Pope of the need of such an organization, while allowing the Holy Father to think it was his own idea. The why was that Baudolino had definitive proof, as he had been in the thrall of one of the vampires for years before breaking its control over him and destroying it. Baudolino quickly became the de facto head of the Malleus Maleficarum and was able to guide his hunters right to vampires, thanks to his familiarity with their habits. Eventually, the vampires took the hint and learned to duck when they heard that the Shadow Congregation was sniffing around them. Originally, membership in the Malleus Maleficarum was open only to monks and nuns, but as the Shadow Congregation entered the 20th century and the ranks of monks and nuns declined, the congregation was forced to open its doors to the laity. Whether lay or clergy, members of the Malleus Maleficarum dedicate every part of their lives to the hunt, with determination, prayer, training, and meditation. And the Shadow Congregation does join efforts with other hunter conspiracies and compacts, especially if they are Catholic. The Malleus Maleficarum has a wealth of knowledge about the creatures of darkness. They are one of the few hunter conspiracies that is not only aware of the Danse Macabre, but knows the difference between the clans and covenants of the undead. What they don't know, generally, is that drinking the blood of vampires will make a human into a near-immortal ghoul. But Father Ambrosio knows. As he neared the end of his life, Ambrosio Baudolino tasked his most trusted hunters to bring him some vampires intact, so that he could extract their blood before delivering them to final death. And so it has been for over 5 centuries. Officially, Ambrosio Baudolino died in 1601. Unofficially, he still commands the Malleus Maleficarum and partakes of vampire blood every few days, just before the creature is destroyed. Only a few witch hunters know that Baudolino still lives. Even fewer know of the Lucifuge, and that the two meet in Milan once every decade. The other target of the Malleus are witches, wizards, warlocks, and other practitioners of evil magic. Capturing the libraries of the spellcasters has given the Shadow Congregation a large and mostly accurate catalog of demons. The Order of St. Longinus are dedicated and fearless vampire hunters, though the Malleus is aware that there is a faction of vampires who also worship St. Longinus, the Lancia Sanctum, though they do not know, or particularly care, why they do so. The Order of St. Ambrose study and investigate the creatures of Satan, work that sometimes bring them into direct conflict with will workers more often than they like. The Brotherhood of St. Athanasius are truly the church militant, favoring the swift and merciless destruction of evil, rather than the studying of it. That's what the Ambrosians are for, who helpfully brief the Athanasians before they charge out into the night with guns blazing and flamethrowers spewing. Task Force Valkyrie. In 1865, the 16th President of the United States, Abraham Lincoln, died. Officially, he died in the Peterson House after being shot in the back of the head by the stage actor John Wilkes Booth. Unofficially, Lincoln died after being captured by an inhuman creature during a failed rescue attempt by government agents led by Gordon West. To prevent the truth from getting out, West hired a body double to replace Lincoln at the Ford Theater, and then allowed Booth, a well-known Confederate sympathizer, to assassinate the president. And so was born Task Force Valkyrie, though they weren't known by that name then, or any other. Their primary goal was to protect the U.S. from supernatural entities and conceal evidence of their existence. The name Task Force Valkyrie came about during a reorganization in 1944 by the Joint Chiefs of Staff after information came to light that the Third Reich received support from certain beings that defied natural categorization. Task Force Valkyrie was embedded within the Allied invasion of continental Europe to quietly neutralize the Nazi supernatural agents. By the end of the war, the TVF held in custody a group of hermaphrodite wizards, a couple of packs of werewolves, and at least a score of Walking Dead and more vampires than they knew what to do with. They also categorized these beings generally as extranormal entities, or ENEs, most of whom were using the war as a cover to carry out their own agendas. And Task Force Valkyrie are the ones who bring those agendas to a screeching halt when they threaten the United States. All of those stories of government cover-ups, men in black, black helicopters, Area 51, Roswell, are true. Task Force Valkyrie is a conspiracy in the most literal sense of the word, and they aren't a theory, they are a fact. However, TFV, like most government agencies, suffers from the usual pitfalls of being mired in bureaucracy, favoritism, ineptitude, and general ass covering. Sometimes it's bad intel, sometimes it's bad decisions from the top. It also doesn't help that Task Force Valkyrie funding is pure black budget, no inspector general, no congressional oversight committee. On paper, Task Force Valkyrie should be smaller than the ATF. So how do they afford the black helicopters, the underground prison in New Mexico, the state-of-the-art arsenals, and research facilities? What if Task Force Valkyrie is a cover for something else, a more secretive and sinister agency within an agency? Task Force Valkyrie has a refined process for dealing with ENEs: report, observe, assess, report again, neutralize, or wait for backup. Sometimes procedures have to give way to practicality. For example, a werewolf charging at you like a freight train, giving you only enough time to draw whatever weapons you have on hand to try and punch as big a hole as possible in its face. Given the nebulous nature of TFV's budget, some agents are tempted to play fast and loose with the agency's advanced weaponry. Of course, this is an easy way to end up in an offshore prison without any of the creature comforts or legal rights of Guantanamo Bay. Task Force Valkyrie is a fight, a war, but it is a subtle war, one that the public cannot know about. Just as important, TFV can't go tipping its hand to the other groups of hunters who may be as bad as the things that TFV hunts. Like every government agency, Task Force Valkyrie has departments within the agency, the two most notable being containment and research and development. However, membership in these two departments is closed off. You don't ask to join, they pick their own members. So if you aren't containment or R&D, a field agent can join a special unit like Project Twilight. Project Twilight deals with E&Es that are classed P and S, entities that are near or post-human and have some degree of clandestine organization of their own. Project Twilight mainly focuses on information gathering. More senior agents attempt to penetrate the SPE&E groups with varying degrees of success. Field agents who are part of Operation Fort focus on the nature and doings of extraterrestrial and extra-dimensional beings. This includes aliens, changelings, demons, spirits, and other such creatures. That being said, they aren't quite as scientific in their methods as the rest of Task Force Valkyrie, given that they don't even have the equipment to properly measure some of the things that they study, and have to occasionally rely on folklore and superstition for insights. The job of keeping the normies safely distracted, misdirected, and when needs be, discredited, falls to Operation Adamski, named after the famous UFO hoaxer George Adamski, who claimed to have been contacted by beings from the planet Venus. Operation Adamski has raised the tactic of poisoning the well to an art. In order to dissuade the public from caring about supernatural creatures or aliens, they feed fake evidence to crackpots who will then spread it, thereby preemptively discrediting anyone who tries to come forward with actual proof. The Cainite Heresy. Who is Cain? This is the adage, the mystery, and the battle cry of the Cainite Heresy. The Cainite Heresy was produced by the frenzied mind of Vitericus Minor, a Gothic gangrel of the 4th century AD. He was converted to Arian Christianity by Ulfius, the bishop to the Goths. When Athanaric, the Thervingi chieftain, began persecuting Christians in Gothic land, Vitericus fled his homeland. His dreams and visions led him to the Black Abbey of the Lancia Sanctum, where he debated theology and the nature of vampires with the sanctified. But when he told them that Cain, blessed of the true God from whom all vampires were descended, spoke to him in a dream, the sanctified turned on Vitericus and cast him out. However, he knew the truth, for Longinus had come to him as well in his dreams, and told him that he was a prophet. In 348, just 4 years after his embrace, Vitericus created the Cainite Heresy in Rome. At the time, Vitericus's Cainite Heresy was a Gnostic cult, which despised matter in favor of spirit, and the lower order of followers from the higher order, the Perfecti. Only the higher order were given the entirety of Vitericus's book, the Euagetimaticon, which taught that Cain, the first murderer, was favored by God and given vampirism as a reward for his strength, so that he might make all mortals his herd. Yeshua the Nazarene and Longinus, Jew and Roman, rabbi and soldier, healer and killer, were both Cain's apostles. Christ, the apostle to the mortals, the cattle, and Longinus, apostle to the vampires, the herders. Vitericus encouraged his Cainites to reject the material world, to abstain from rich foods and sex, and become like Cain. Some Perfecti even attempted to mimic Vitericus's consumption of blood. But time passes, and some of the 45 followers of Vitericus came to believe that he was a heretic to his own teachings. He clung to mortal flesh, rather than commending his spirit to the one above, as Jesus did. In 362, during a battle against the followers of Eupraxis, another vampire with messianic delusions, Vitericus's followers stabbed him in the back, literally, in order to free his spirit, by way of removing his head from his neck. The vampires of Rome were finally rid of Vitericus, but his Cainite heresy would last into the modern knights as an order of vampire hunters, who regard the brood of Cain as heretics and abominations to be slaughtered to the last. Most of the modern Cainite heresy knows little to nothing of Vitericus, or the origins of their conspiracy. Vitericus did leave the followers with another legacy apart from a deep hatred of vampires. During his time in the Black Abbey, Vitericus learned how the sanctified used blood to create miracles. The Cainite heresy have since transmuted this art into their own rites of denial, which were originally imparted to them by beings known only as the Sources. The Sources are the Cainites' guardian angels and their mission control. When a Cainite rises high enough or kills enough vampires, eventually the Sources contact them, in the form of letters with no addresses and text messages with no senders. Even a scrap of paper stuffed into a pocket in a crowded train platform. The Sources always seem to know who is a Cainite, how to find them, and most importantly, where, when, and how to kill vampires. The Cainites do not have factions per se, but throughout the history of the heresy, certain thoughts continually emerge, one of which are the extremists, who wish to see the absolute, total destruction of vampires. Ideally, they want to expose the vampires to the governments of the world and force them to take action, to turn the machine of state into an engine that slaughters or imprisons every last bloodsucker. The revolutionists, wisely perhaps, do not take such an optimistic view of the alleged wisdom or morality of the state. They propose that if vampires are to be destroyed, it will be by the ordinary people, who will rise up to do so. To that end, they try to insert their information into whatever hands they can, through mass media, social media, or good old-fashioned pamphleteering. The fatalists are the largest ideology of the Cainite heresy in the modern day. They are fine with letting the extremists and revolutionists fantasize about a great worldwide culling of vampires, but they believe, however, that the only ones with the will and means to destroy vampires are the Cainites themselves. The Faithful of Shulpae. There may be some secret in the name Shulpae, the Mesopotamian god of feasts and funerals, but if there is, not even those who claim to be his faithful know it. Oh, they know about feasting and feeding, especially from the undying. The Faithful of Shulpae are secretive in the extreme, so secretive that few records of them exist anywhere. But the conspiracy is very old and very real. The Faithful are the hunters of the gods who deign to walk among mortals in flesh, and in so doing, offer that divine meat to the faithful, so that they might step ever closer to the gods and attain apotheosis. For the faithful, worship means consuming the gods, absorbing their holy essence, and becoming something greater than human. The Faithful of Shulpae pass their traditions of deicide down along family lines and in tight cults. Occasionally, new members of the Faithful are called by fate to join, as they occasionally stumble on a feast ritual. Auspicious timing is simply another way of phrasing fate's calling. That said, the Faithful do not devote much thought to what they are eating, in that they don't bog themselves down with particularities about vampires, werewolves, mummies, or Prometheans. To the Faithful, they are all gods in flesh, whose bodies must be reaped to feed them. The Faithful do have a particular interest in mummies, and the power that surrounds them. Considering that the feast does imbue the Faithful with some of the power of their victims, the Faithful are intimately familiar with what mummies are capable of, and how to counteract them. The Faithful preferred not to kill their prey before a feast, but it comes down to safety and timing. And it is fortunate for the Faithful of Shulpae that they are so secretive. Otherwise, the gods in flesh would have hunted them to extinction centuries ago. The heart of the conspiracy is the Keepers, and the Keepers keep a great many things: the temples of the Faithful, the feasting calendar, the entombed gods whose flesh regenerates between feasts, and the roster of those permitted to partake, and in what order. Sometimes the Keepers do par off an arm or a leg or an organ here and there, if the gods are reforming too quickly for their liking. The Keepers can also be a nasty shock for anyone determined to uncover the Faithful's secrets, or who seek to destroy their temples, as the wizened old women and men are closest to achieving apotheosis. Just because fate chooses who joins the Faithful doesn't mean that additional guidance is not required. The guides serve a twofold purpose. First, they watch for gods who are worthy of being worshipped by the Faithful, in the only way that the gods can be properly worshipped, at the feast table. The second is they search for the bright souls who may be guided to the feasts, and are prepared to understand and eventually join the Faithful of Shulpae. The celebrants are the most fanatical of the Faithful. They are true Sybarites, as they seek out the gods and drag them, however seemingly unwilling, to the feast. The celebrants worship often and to the point of gluttony. This doesn't necessarily make them competent hunters of the gods, but for the right to the first and greatest portion of divine power, risking one's life is a fair gamble, at least to them. The Knights of St. Adrian. In the 1990s, Army veteran Casey Howard worked as a skip tracer, or bounty hunter. She was well suited to the work both physically and mentally. She could take down a bail jumper and then fill out the bond revocation paperwork. Then one day she broke her arm surfing and she was done with chasing skips. The arm never healed properly because she didn't go to a doctor soon enough. The company kept her on doing paperwork and investigations, but she was out of the action, which eventually wore on her patience. Then one day, while she was having lunch in a bar, a stranger made her a peculiar offer. He could arrange to fix her arm if she just gave him her memories of a friend she had after she left the army. Of course, the offer was weird as hell, so she told him to screw off. The following week, another stranger approached her in the same bar and asked about the man from the week before. Casey was now curious. Was he a skip? Did he owe money? The second man simply answered that the man who offered her a pact the week before was a demon, an enemy of God, and needed to be located. For some reason, Casey agreed, but qualified that someone else would have to subdue him, as her arm was simply no good. So the second man wrote on her arm in some strange characters that Casey couldn't read. Then, her arm was healed. Simple as that. 8 years later, Casey Howard owns and operates Howard Investigation Services, chasing the skips and jumpers other agents can't find or won't go after. But it is a cover for a conspiracy known as the Knights of St. Adrian, and fulfills the same purpose. The servants of God send in a contract for a demon they want hunted, and the knights go to work. Even angels need to farm out some of their work from time to time. In the 8 years since, every member of the Knights has similar tattoos in the same angelic script as Howard, which lets them give the demons some of their own medicine. The Knights know exactly what they're up against. Demons feed on mortal lives and connections. Sure, they offer deals, but ultimately, it's just taking someone's soul in installments. Despite being licensed and contracted agents of God, God Machine, they are not exactly religious like the Malleus Maleficarum or the Long Night. But after a couple of hunts, a Knight of St. Adrian will not only believe, but know definitively that something else is out there. And once you're in, there's no backing out. Dispatchers are the Knights who hand out assignments but keep the paperwork in order, whether it is for hunts, weapons, or travel. Usually, dispatchers arrange for a legitimate bounty or skip for a team to go after while carrying out a contract on a demon. The hounds are the hunters who go fetch the errant demon so that it can receive God's judgment, either at the hands of one of the angels or right on the spot. The deliverers work with the hounds when a contract calls for a demon to be disabled and turned over to the angels, and are masters in binding and restricting demons, both physically and metaphysically. The Knights of St. George. For as long as there have been stories about dragons, there have been as many about men who slay them. The dragon slayers do not simply slay flying reptiles, but also those who have claimed descent from the dragons, namely witches and sorcerers. It was one of these witches, in service to Henry the young king, son and heir of Henry II and Eleanor of Aquitaine, who cursed his younger brother and rival to the throne, Richard. Richard was plagued by nightmarish portents of his death and incompetence by his nobles. Richard's retainers learned of a small but powerful band of men who were said to be wise in the ways of heathen sorcery and had not taken the young king's coin. These were dragon slayers, and when they learned that Richard was the victim of witchcraft, they immediately set about lifting the curse and hunting the witch responsible. Eventually, the witch died, and the young king followed soon after. When the conflict between Richard and his father ended, the new heir to the English throne sought out his saviors personally. The dragon slayers told Richard what had been passed down to them from the days of antiquity, about the dragons of Atlantis, magic, the old gods, and the new gods. Richard incorporated the dragon slayers and granted them patents as Knights of St. George, the patron saint of England and the great dragon slayer of the kingdom. Since its founding, the Knights of St. George have always been led by a descendant of Richard the Lionheart, through his bastard, Philip of Cognac, who the Knights have kept watch over, and watch over all of Philip's issue. When the dragon slayers arrived in the New World, they found not only witches to hunt, but native dragon slayers, who aided them in their quest. It was also in the New World that the Knights discovered the Goetic Gospels, texts which grant the dragon slayers the power to poison and tear apart magic. The dragon slayers are associated with the Church of England, and often make use of the church for their purpose, even though they are decidedly not Christian. They have walked the world before Jesus Christ, and they have not changed their ways, only covered them up so that not only are outsiders in the dark as to what the Knights of St. George are, but even their own members who have not received what they call the revelations. Those who are not privy to the revelations serve as squires, keeping up the Knights' appearances to mortals as an obscure, fraternal, and charitable Anglican-affiliated organization. But what are the revelations? There are three. The first revelation is the realization that witches and magic are real, and that they draw their strength from the supernal realms. At this revelation, a squire is elevated to a knight, and encouraged to study the limited version of the Goetic Gospels. If the knight was ever Christian, they are, through guided study and conversation, subtly moved away from it towards the Goetia. The second revelation is a test of the knight's faith, not in God, but in the order and the beings that the order truly serves, the faceless angels, the enemies of the ancient dragons, who gave magic to the witches, and enemies of the witches themselves. To reach this stage, a knight's Christian faith must be subverted and broken before he will even consider worshiping the faceless angels. Most knights will never pass beyond the second revelation, and never be allowed to look on the treatise of St. George, the true history of the world, and the ancient struggle between the dragons who desire the world and the faceless angels who hold them at bay, though the angels may destroy the world itself in order to keep it from the dragon's claws. This is the third and final revelation. The congregation of VASCU are the support staff of the knights, and ensure that the order's infrastructure is in place to support the hunt, including safe houses, weapons, false identities, and other necessities. Many are members of the Anglican Church who make certain that the knights' work in their area is done successfully and secretly. The Vascuoans also keep the archives of the order and relay any information back to the knights' headquarters to be compiled and preserved for future use. The Congregation of Forest are knights who seek to destroy incidents of magic rather than magic users. To that end, they track and eradicate cryptids, acquire magical relics for destruction, and neutralize places where gnosis might be drained. When confronted with actual witches, the Forasians prefer to observe more so than other congregations would deem appropriate, when capture or destruction would be practical or preferable. The bulk of the Dragon Slayers belong to the Congregation of Malthus. The Malthusians are implacable witch hunters who spend most of their time collecting clues trying to locate individual witches, or better yet, entire covens, before unleashing as much of the conspiracy on them as possible. This congregation associates with other conspiracies and compacts more than the previous two, and they are extremely careful not to let knowledge of the second and third revelations slip to outsiders. Les Mysteres. Les Mysteres is a conspiracy nearly as old as humanity, dating back to the holy men and mystics who first spoke to the spirits on behalf of their people, or perhaps spoke to the people on behalf of the spirits. Either way, Les Mysteres walked with one foot in each world. Some were hailed as great heroes, while others were cursed as monsters, possessed, and unclean workers of magic. But Les Mysteres continued to walk through the ages, placating benign spirits and fighting hostile ones. The oldest seed of the conspiracy is typically traced to West Africa and the Yoruba, who created rituals to bring the Orishas, avatars of Odumad, the supreme god, into their own flesh. These secret rituals were passed to others who possessed the gift of spirit talking, and even traveled across the oceans to the Americas with those who were captured and sold from defeated peoples to the Europeans. Their new masters had but one god, and little interest in the obviously fictional, or worse, demonic beings their slaves had worshipped in Africa. For a time, the Bokor, the wandering priests of the Orishas, or Loas as they became known, were hunted in the French West Indies and New France. But the priests who crossed the oceans managed to keep contact with their brothers and sisters in Africa, and their influence spread. Before they needed no name for what they practiced, but secrecy necessitated they identify themselves to one another and to those who needed their services. So a seemingly innocent answer and question became a badge of identification among the people. Connais-tu les mystères? Do you know the mysteries? Je connais les mystères. I know the mysteries. At first, les mystères served only the Yoruba, Ewe, and Fon people. In time, the Bokor were called upon by others, slaves and freemen alike, to summon the Loa, or the angels and saints, to act on their behalf. Les Mystères spread into high society of Europe as mystery cults and syncretized with other religions whose members opened themselves to the presence of God, or the gods, into themselves. Les Mystères refined the skills of their various members to allow themselves to be spirit-ridden and show respect to the spirits. Eventually, Les Mystères entered conflict with creatures who stalked the world of darkness, the vampires who glutted themselves on the blood of their slaves, the werewolves who presumed to suppress the Loas and keep them confined to the spirit world, insane mystics who practiced blood magic. Les Mystères found that the only way to protect their charges against these predators was to join the spirits to their flesh. Les Mystères are a conspiracy not because they are well organized, but because they are widespread. Cells of Les Mystères exist all around the world, many of which, at first blush, appear completely unrelated to one another. a group of Pentecostals in Tennessee, an underground Dao Mao outside Ho Chi Minh City, a group of Latter-day Saints who still make use of seer stones, and Crow medicine men who undergo vision quests and perform sun dances. Les Mysteres are united, to a point, by the idea of inviting something innately inhuman into them and allowing it to direct their bodies, whether they call it the Loa, the Holy Spirit, or Old Man Coyote. Les Mysteres stand at the crossroads, as they put it, between worlds, which also determines the paths they walk. The forward path is the path of fellowship. These hunters seek to use the spirit world to improve the lives of humans. The left-hand path is the path of spirit, which is as straightforward as it sounds. These Mysteres are not merely horses, but seek to appease the spirits whenever possible, leading the changing nearby spirit loci to better suit their allies. The right-hand path is the path of beasts, Mysteres who wage war against the children of Father Wolf, who try to keep the spirits confined to the shadow. This has drawn Les Mysteres into unforeseen alliances and rivalries with creatures who oppose the Uratha. The backward path is the path of the soul, leading to contemplation and reflection on the path that the Mystere has walked, and determines whether they have ably served both the people and the Loa. The Merrick Institute. The Merrick Research Institute does not exist. Every 6 months, the U.S. government changes the name of the Merrick Institute, destroying all unessential notes and personnel before transferring it to a new entity. The Merrick practice, or the wintergreen process, was developed to tap the power of the subconscious mind. What the researchers didn't know, or didn't care to know, is that they were sending their test subjects into a realm of nightmares, where ancient beasts dwelled. The wintergreen process was sold to the U.S. military as a potential weapon that could upset the balance of power between nations. The Merrick Institute recruits children who meet their qualification, selling themselves to parents as an elite school for gifted children. Even if the parents refuse, their children vanish all the same and end up in the Merrick Institute labs, where they are subjected to a variety of tests to force their brains to develop along certain desired pathways. These experiments usually end in the deaths of the subjects, but those who survive become lethal military weapons, or they did. In 2013, the Merrick Institute suffered an insurrection of their test subjects. The teenagers attacked the researchers and guards, leaving only enough alive to help them unlock their dream potential and to care for those who had been rendered comatose by the Institute's experiments. The members of the Institute know the beasts for what they are and what they will do to humanity if left unchecked. The Merrick Institute has organized itself into cells spread across North America and beyond, one step ahead of the government trying to bring them back into the fold. Occasionally, a rogue Merrick Institute cell will attack one still under government control to free the test subjects in their laboratories. The Merrick Institute, as a name, now serves as a symbol of defiance for the beasts that the Institute hunts, as well as those who previously enslaved them. The Merrick Institute primarily hunts the begotten, though they have encountered the Fae in their dream walks and come away from the experience changed. Whether or not it was for the better is a matter of speculation. The Reformers are a group of Merrick Institute hunters who believe that the initial purpose of the Institute was wrong, but the group that remains could benefit from a centralized hierarchy. To that end, the Reformers have set up even more labs outside of the United States. Some Reformers have even proposed the creation of micronations to further their research. The Firebrands want to bring the entire conspiracy to an end in favor of decentralized, nomadic cults, so much so that they firebomb their own compatriots in Reformer labs, though they make sure that the labs are empty before they attack. The Fleshists are the reconnaissance arm of the Merrick Institute, focusing their dream gifts towards gathering intelligence on monsters, and attack those they consider to be the most immediate threat. Vanguard Serial Crime Unit. In 1924, a Justice Department lawyer named John Edgar Hoover was appointed head of the Bureau of Investigation. Hoover proceeded to reorganize the Bureau into a more effective government agency. One part of the reorganization dealt with newly developed knowledge concerning serial killers, which was placed under the purview of the Repeat Crimes Unit. The RCU would investigate murders with similar modus operandi in different jurisdictions. Eventually, the RCU realized that some of these transient murderers weren't just criminally insane, but actual monsters. The RCU successfully brought a number of serial killers to justice, but in 1953, the unit suffered the most serious failure in its history, the Cohulawasi Massacre. 6 men disappeared while on a trip down the Cohulawasi River. One of them was a brother of an RCU member. The subsequent investigation revealed that the men were murdered and eaten by a family of inbred, mutated cannibals. Somebody's a fan of Deliverance. Anyway, October 23rd of the same year, the RCU conducted a raid on the cannibal family's farm, leading to the deaths of the entire family and all but 2 of the RCU agents in a chaotic firefight. The disaster was reported up the chain of command and eventually landed on Director Hoover's desk. He responded by reorganizing the RCU into the Serious Crimes Investigation Unit. In addition to more funding and the addition of psychologists, the SCIU was also granted the authority to investigate any crimes that were linked to at least 3 deaths in any given state. Some of the psychologists were FBI agents. Others were profilers who were just along for the ride. This in turn made them attractive targets for the types of things that enjoy killing without mercy. In 1973, a new psychologist was shifted to the SCIU from a recently shuttered CIA program called MK Ultra. Her name was Dr. Barbara Wintergreen. The SCIU would give Wintergreen and her team the relative time and secrecy she needed for their work in MK Ultra to bear fruit. The main purpose of MK Ultra, as exposed later by the Church Commission, was to develop a reliable method for brainwashing its targets. One of the 150 sub-projects of MK Ultra was Dr. Wintergreen's focus on tapping and exploiting the unused potential of the human mind. Eventually, Dr. Wintergreen succeeded with the development of a combination of dimethyltryptamine and telepathine, which would bond with the chemical receptors of the brain and throw the information processing centers into overdrive. Agents who underwent the Wintergreen process described the experience as otherworldly, though the specifics differ from agent to agent. Likewise, the abilities that develop as a result of the Wintergreen process, teleinformatics, differ between agents, but fall into a few general categories that the unit subsequently identified and categorized. Not long after the Wintergreen method began producing results, a rift opened between the doctor and the agency. She believed that more training was needed in the agent's new abilities. The SCIU pointed out that they had successfully closed a number of otherwise unsolvable slasher cases. She countered that at least 2 agents had become delusional and paranoid. Another simply vanished from the Bureau entirely. In October 1978, that's what Dr. Wintergreen did as well. She stopped showing up and no one could find her. By 1979, the long knives were out for the SCIU as well, both inside and outside the unit. They had marked success against mortal serial killers. When it came to supernatural serial killers, however, they were still outmatched. Later that same year, the SCIU managed to catch not 1, but 3 supernatural killers. One of the suspects caught fire and was immolated as she was being walked into the courthouse for trial. The other 2 were put on death row. This led to the SCIU testing every agent for compatibility with the Wintergreen method. Nearly everyone who tested positive consented to undergo the drug treatment. Additionally, FBI agents outside of the SCIU were tested and passed along to the unit for the Wintergreen method. The SCIU was, and still is, perpetually understaffed, but the new manpower raised the SCIU's effectiveness, which led to more closed cases, including one notorious case in Haddonfield, Illinois, where a seemingly implacable slasher was put down permanently on Halloween night. Following the Haddonfield case, the SCIU was reorganized again in 1982 to its current form, the Vanguard Serial Crimes Unit. They are the World of Darkness's preeminent experts on serial killers, mass murderers, death cults, and slashers. They also have ties to the Society of the 12 Keys, a back channel that allows British and European agencies to call on VASCU expertise when needed. VASCU, like most FBI sub-branches, has internal departments to handle different operational or administrative tasks needed for the unit to function. The Field Liaison Department are the hunters who work with those outside of the organization, usually undercover, to either arrest or kill supernatural serial killers. Agents of the Field Liaison Department have a reputation for being willing to bend or even break the rules if it means closing a case. The Operations Department does a lot of the traditional investigative and police work of VASCU and account for 7 of every 10 agents. Following the 1982 reorganization, every ops team has at least one veteran agent attached to 2 less experienced agents to ensure the investigations and arrests go by the book, or, at the very least, to protect the reputation of the FBI and VASCU. The Special Project Department handles those cases that are considered too extreme, too psychologically and emotionally taxing for other agents to deal with. What makes the SPD unique is that they are either psychics more powerful than the normal agent, or they are able to put themselves in the mindset of the worst kinds of psychopaths, and then predict what they will do next, even if those killers don't use mundane means to slay their victims. The SPD are also some of the most relentless agents in VASCU, as they know the things they hunt can never be left alone. They either have to be caged or killed, because they cannot or will not stop on their own. And those were the conspiracies of Hunter the Vigil. The major difference between a conspiracy and a compact is the utilization of endowments. I like some hunters in Vigil having secret weapons above and beyond just me and the boys are headed out to kill some monsters, that they manage to crack into some secret of the world that they utilize against outsiders and enemies. Of course, there's a lot of wiggle room between having anti-magic sci-fi weapons like Task Force Valkyrie, utilizing the power of prayer like the Malleus Maleficarum, and sewing monster parts inside of yourself like the Cheiron Group. Like I said in the last video, White Wolf finally got what they were aiming for with the toolbox-style game in Vigil. Shame it didn't translate into later editions. And given how long it's taken to do these, don't expect me to pick up these Vigil books again for a good while. Anyway, that's all I have for now. Until next time.